Welcome to A Good Felina. I'm Felina. Hope you're enjoying this series. I'm going to continue on the communist series, and this episode is going to be a much broader look at what's going on in South Africa. Give you a much broader picture. See, I like to start with world history, because things don't happen in a vacuum. It's not just right here, this is happening. There's a broader picture, and there's history. There's hundreds or thousands of years of history that goes back, that brings us to this moment in time when something is happening and why it's happening. And unfortunately, South Africa, this whole thing, if you look at the big picture, has to do with communism. And it really does, okay? So let's step back. Let's look at the world, and we're going to step back from the world for just a tad. And then we're going to come in, and then we're going to close in on South Africa. I know that Lauren Southern has done an extensive amount of work, and Stefan Molyeux, on this subject. A beautiful job, a compassionate job, a very detailed job. And of course, Styx Hexenhammer kind of did a wonderful job the other day. He just kind of condensed everything and just brought it to a head. He seems to know how to do that in about 8 minutes. That's his genius, really. Anyway, here's the world. Okay, we're back in this beautiful blue marble. And as we move into this blue marble, I'm going to start in the Americas, because a lot of this whole idea of land, people taking land, comes, in the Americas. For some reason, we focus on this, even though it's happened all over the world. Or maybe I should go back a bit. Let's go back in time. As the archaeology keeps finding the oldest evolved humans, well, we heard that it was the Balkans and Greece that humans evolved from first. And then it was Morocco, which is, instead of East Africa, that's Upper West Africa. That's actually very close to Spain. And of course, you've got the Straits of Gibraltar. And there was a time when Italy was actually connected to Africa. So that's just a walkover. It's very, very close and a very quick walkover to Europe. So the people who evolved right there, and in Morocco, we didn't quite know what their skin pigmentation was, because they were not living in or near the equator. And the only reason why, of course, this whole thing has to do with skin pigmentation. You know that. Everything that's going on in the world, it's all about skin pigmentation. And the only reason why you have the pigmentation that you do, or your body is built the way it is, the way you look the way you do, has to do with how far away your ancestors lived from the sun, or what terrain they had to move through, and what food was available to eat. And when they finally settled down to farmland, agricultural land, what they produced. Okay, and if this civilization, if they began some type of civilization, and the civilization thrived because wars were much less. They were constant. They weren't fighting all the time with the tribe next to them. In Africa, it seemed like there was a lot of fighting going on for a very long time. One tribe would fight the other constantly, and you were always on your guard. So you could never, the people of Africa, it's very hard for them just to settle down and to think of something else other than defending yourself. If you have the time to think of how do we make our world better, we don't have to fight off anybody. Nobody's going to come in the night and rape our women and skin our men alive. We can actually, that's the same thing with the tribes in North America. If you're constantly, on guard for the next tribe to come in and to take your men, that's what they would do. They would take their men back to their tribe and they would skin them alive. They would flay them alive. And the Aztecs did this too, even though that was a flourishing civilization, which is very interesting. And the architecture there, they say, actually might go back thousands of years. They say that it's quite possible that they didn't build any of that, that they actually, it was their claim that it was, when they came, it was already there. And that's a possibility. I don't want to take anything away from them, but then again, they did kill about 5,000 or 6,000 people a day by cutting their hearts out and then flaying them alive. They were really, really something of a people. But anyway, so you've got this going on in Africa, and this was going on in Africa for an awful long time. It's a very difficult place to live, and a lot of wild animals and a lot of diseases. So there was no time to settle down and think about, how do we avoid diseases? How do we cure these diseases? What are herbs or whatever it is that we need to think of? There was no time to think, because it was constantly, if you've got a tribe that wants to war and you want to be peaceful, you can't be. So this is the big picture of what's kind of going on, why Africa is the way it is. And of course, if you're born albino in Africa, because they have that wonderful religion, voodoo, if you're born an albino, they think you're magical, and then they cut parts of your body off a little at a time, and they boil it, and they think it's a gift from the heavens. So there really isn't any time to think about, hey, this really doesn't make any sense. There's no time for that to happen. And it happened in other parts of the world because people kind of settled down. Or what they did was, there was enough time to settle down, think about forming a civilization, think about healing, the ways of healing, and then having a standing army at all times, like Egypt had a standing army at all times, Assyria, all these countries around me had a standing army, and their job was, just like our job is to be the best fighting force in the world. The best fighting force that they get, and they're constantly perfecting that and trying different battle strategies. And then you have a general that's thinking about all this stuff all the time. And in Africa, it didn't happen that way. It's just that they had to constantly think about defending their tribe, constantly, just like the tribes, the Native American tribes, constantly had to think. And so they couldn't stop and form that civilization and then have the standing army, because there's always somebody that wants to come in and take your land. Okay, there's a really big picture. And we've got this whole thing in North and South America, and who came here first? Well, we all believe that the Native Americans did. But we've come to find out, and if we admit this to ourselves, there's by an arrowhead that was carefully carved out of flint on both sides, a perfectly formed arrowhead, beautifully. And what they did was they cut it on both sides. It was double-sided. It wasn't just one-sided. It was just completely formed from top to bottom. And there were very advanced forms of tools, and they didn't know where they actually came from. And because none of these tools, when archaeology has dug up through the Bering Strait, Asia, Upper Asia, Siberia, through the Bering Strait, they can't find anything quite like this. They made their arrowheads completely different. Well, they found this arrowhead, and this arrowhead actually was in southern France. And the people who made this arrowhead were the Solutreans. Apparently, because there were skin boats, what they did was they made skin boats, and they could have possibly traveled over here during the Ice Age when the coastline of America was 50 miles out. I know this. Where are we coming to South Africa? We're coming to it. We're coming to it. Big picture first. This is what Felina always does. She's going to tell you the big picture first, and then she's going to zero in on what she's talking about, okay? And we'll get to the communism part. So 50 miles out, we have this coastline that is no longer there, and the reason why coastlines over thousands of years have shrunk all over the world. India, Dwarka, used to be a huge city that is now under the sea. And it is more to do with the coastline just shrinking. You've got your ice age, and then you've got your warming period after the ice age. And we're still warming after that little ice age 500 years ago. We're still in that warming period. But see, that's the big picture. But people with the whole climate change thing don't really look at the big picture. And that's quite unfortunate. But anyway, so all the archaeology from the Solutreans is probably under the water. So the belief is that these people came here because we found these arrowheads here. And they didn't come through the Bering Strait. They didn't come from the northwest. They came, and they were originated thousands of years before we found them here in southern France. So were the Solutreans here first? I know the Solutreans finally, they merged with people. It came over the Bering Strait and formed the Clovis civilization. And then in South America, they found these strange elongated heads, and they believed, they wanted to know, of course, they always wanted to know if aliens, they're aliens. Well, they tested the DNA, and very recently it came out that these people were actually from around the Black Sea. So you kind of wonder around the Black Sea, and then you see that agriculture was formed around, quite there, but near there. That's kind of like where this cradle of civilization was. And then, the ziggurats were built, right? And you've got this, and now the ziggurats were I say that was before the pyramids, kind of. And in South America, you've got more like ziggurats because you don't have the point on the top. It's more like a ziggurat, right? You climb up it, you sacrifice your victim, and you've got a nice top on there that you can hold the blood and throw the body down and everything like that. Well, anyway, so it could possibly be. So you say we were so obsessed, like who was here first and who took whose land from who. And it's also been proven that the Aborigines actually came to this land possibly before the Asians did, because they've got rock carvings of Aborigines being killed by another group of people, and it seems to coincide with the Asians coming over and then settling down into the tip of South America. And of course the Polynesians also moved in, which is another group of people. So who killed who? Of course, PBS, another one of those PBS things, says that when the white man came to South America, what they did was they brought their sheep. And when the people who had descended from the Aborigines, because some did mate with the population that we now consider native indigenous people, and some of their DNA was in there. And apparently the landowners who owned the sheep shot them if they stole some of the sheep. And of course, PBS says that they shot them because they were not white. And this is how we wiped out the last of these people, when most of these people were actually wiped out from being killed by the Asians that came over. And now we realize that the tuna actually brought all these diseases. And that partly wiped them out as well. But see the bigger picture, if you go to the bigger picture, you go back to where these white people came from. The law was poaching is punishable by death. Of course, in England, anything that you stole, even if it was a spade because you were poor and you needed to grow crops, that was punishable by death. Or when the colonies came, they sold these white people to the colonies for 5 silver coins. And it is very interesting that if you were to buy an African slave, they were worth a lot more. They were 50 silver coins. White people weren't worth this much, even to other white people. So that's if you stop and think about that for a second, that's kind of really interesting. So they're treating the white people really poorly. So you think that it's a white-black thing, and it's not really a white-black thing at all when you really think about the big picture. But of course, PBS constantly, they constantly makes the twist that it's always because of the color of their skin. Or the Native Americans had slaves, yes, and they all had slaves, but it was not race-based. But what about when the Native Americans, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and the Cherokee took African slaves? They took African slaves, and so these people were not citizens of America, and they were not citizens of the tribes either. They were non-citizens, but nonetheless they were slaves. Well, those are different races, because Asians are Caucasian. And they're also part, of course, you've got some Solutrean in there, and possibly part Aborigines, and possibly part Polynesian. So you've got a whole mix of races going on there, but none of them are Negroid. Negroid, that's the correct. Caucasoid, Negroid, okay? All right, so those are like different, there's Mongoloid, there's different races. So this was race-based. But of course, you're not going to, when you read about slavery amongst the Native Americans, you will not read about the fact that, yes, they were a different race. Did they capture them as slaves because they were a different race? Did the Americans, English or white people, take the black slaves over around the entire world? The slave trade was sold all over the world. Did they take them because of their race? And interesting to note, I have a friend who's quite an intellectual who said that part of the reason why they preferred the black slaves were that they could tell them apart. If someone was a slave that was loose, they could say, well, is that person could be a slave. It's an interesting way to look at it. It's a hard thing to say, but it's kind of like you are, someone who looks like that could possibly be a slave, or they could be a free person, I don't know. But if they're looking for my slave ran away, it's easier then. Of course, the white ones were so frail and so impoverished, believe it or not, that they died, and they had the harder labor because they wanted them to have harder labor. Like when they threw bales into a ship, it was the white people in the hull, and the black slaves were throwing these huge bales to them. And it was asked once, and I think I heard this from Stefan Molyeux, that why the white ones in the ship. And they said it's because the black ones are actually worth more. So if we kill a white one, we really don't care. Because it's true, 50 silver coins. So that story rings true, because I know this from other sources. The story rings true that a black slave was worth 50 silver coins and a white only 5. So they never lived to see freedom. They never lived to see the abolishment of slavery because they were treated so poorly and they were so frail. But you see, if you see the big picture and how people suffered, and the word slave came from the word Slav, because they were enslaved so many times. Slavs were enslaved so many times. They were the first slaves of the world. So it wasn't that black people were immediately marked as slaves. And another interesting thing to note is that in Africa doesn't have any big deal. They don't have any big deal at all whatsoever about enslaving their own people. And this whole new thing about that there's this freedom and now black people get to reclaim their land. and the black people are free. Well, they're keeping 6 million Africans as slaves, black Africans as slaves right now. So it isn't other black Africans are keeping these people as slaves. So it isn't like your only problem in Africa is because the Dutch happened and the Huguenots happened to land in South Africa, where it was so sparsely populated, there really wasn't anybody there. And they were great, the Dutch were great shipbuilders, and they colonized what we call New York State right now. It used to be New Amsterdam, and also there's a part of the Indies that they populated because they were such great shipbuilders. 17th century was the golden age of shipbuilding, so I think it was 1752 that they landed in Cape Town. See, we got to South Africa. They landed in Cape Town, and there was really nobody there. It was a deserted place. It was considered a desert. And so they started farming. And then the Huguenots, who were being persecuted in France, they were a persecuted group of people that were looking for a new land. And can you really blame them? And so they landed in South Africa, and they became farmers. And they had a place where they wouldn't be persecuted. Apartheid means apart. They lived apart. They lived apart. And what happened was, actually fairly recently, it wasn't that long, from the more tropical areas of Africa, the black Africans, see, Africa is a continent. It is not a country. South Africa was not a country at that time. It was an acclaimed country with a constitution and a set of laws. It was kind of like deserted land. So the tropical areas of Africa, and Africans it took a long time to form countries and constitutions and so on and so forth. But there was actually nothing there when the Dutch and then the Huguenots came after the Dutch. So when you really kind of look at the big picture here, what's really going on. So you've got the black moved into the settled area of Cape Town, where there were farms. It was thriving. There's buildings and a whole, what we would consider a civilization, a city, a form of government, and lots of food. Lots and lots of food. And they really knew how to grow food and grow it very well. Okay, so these people moved down. See, you've got your continent, and of course, you've got your native. The people from Asia moved into the Americas, and of course, Solutreans came over, and then the Aborigines came over, right, from Australia, probably in skin boats, right? Now there's a little carving that they say they found in Australia on a rock of a boat, so it's quite possible that they came over in skin boats, and they say that they were blown off course and landed in South America. So you've got that group of people down there. So you've got this continent that's fairly empty, and all these people kind of moving in at different times. They meet up with each other, they war, they grow bigger and bigger, they form different tribes, people look different, they move to different, and then they war with each other, and then they take their land away, as I started in another video that I did about Mexico and the war with Mexico. I start with the Black Hills because the Black Hills were owned by several different Native American tribes. The Sioux won it back, this is where Mount Rushmore is. Sioux won it back, but the Sioux had stolen it from the Cheyenne. They warred on the Cheyenne. They killed them off. They massacred them. And then they took the Black Hills. And before that, the Cheyenne took it from somewhere else. So you've got all these tribes warring with each other and taking land away. So this is not unusual, you could say, that people moved south in Africa to a part that used to be desert but was now populated. and now are basically have adopted a communist government. You got your hammer and sickle. You'll see the president in front of the hammer and sickle. And you see, they're really in for something. They're really in for something because unfortunately, there's a lot of Black people who don't know the whole history of everything, and they think that they're going to win right now. They're going to take that land, and they're going to win. Like in Zimbabwe, the same thing happened. The white farmers, that was the breadbasket of Africa, and then Zimbabwe took all the land away from the white farmers, and then they starved. And it's interesting, 1985. In July 1985. Remember, we had that Live Aid concert with Princess Diana and Prince Charles because Africa was starving. Africa couldn't feed itself. Africa was starving. And so the world got together and helped Africa and fed them and sent money from all over the world because they were having a difficult time feeding themselves and growing crops and all that. And so Zimbabwe took their land, took the land back and now they're actually calling the white people back because they knew how to farm the land. Everybody's got their talent, everybody's got their talent. And maybe these white farmers have a talent for farming. And it would be a good idea that maybe the Black people in Zimbabwe should learn that talent as well. Anybody can be taught anything. And I don't believe there's any such thing as there's a civilization that's actually smarter, or this group of people smarter than that group of people. The reason why I say that is, like I said before, people have time to settle down. When wars decrease, you form more people, the population grows, you've got your part of the population that becomes masters at war. So the rest of the population can concentrate on medicine and education and growing crops and so on and so forth, everything that makes a civilization. So it's probably would be a good idea for them to learn, but they would have to work together and stop seeing this whole color thing and we own this land kind of thing, because sometimes the land isn't occupied and there is no country there and people kind of land there. But somehow the idea of the Americas is that the Americas are owned by one group of people and it was actually stolen from them when all sorts of groups of people came. In fact, 3000 BC, they say the Chinese came over here, and they say that the Romans, they found Roman artifacts. Was it up there on Oak Island? Canada. The Romans came here as well. So it's a world, and people are adventurers. Man is an adventurer. And once man builds that boat, they go all over the world. Aborigines, they say, got to Australia. They say it came out of Africa. It's interesting. But we assume they come out of Africa. We assume that that's where they evolved as humans. We're making that assumption. And then they went to Asia, and they lived in Asia for thousands of years, South Asia. And it could be then in South Asia, when they were near the equator, that their skin actually got darker. And from there, they went to Australia. But it's interesting that the boomerang is found in Australia, and it's also found in Egypt. We don't know if Aborigines visited Egypt, or Egypt actually visited the Aborigines. And it's quite possible that Egypt actually visited the Aborigines, because there's tobacco and cocaine, which is only found in the Americas, that was found in Egyptian mummies. So it's quite possible that the Egyptians actually came here first. That's a long time ago. So who owns what? Who owns what? It's who stole what? The Native Americans actually, they don't have any idea about land ownership. That isn't their thing. It's who is occupying the land at the time. not who owns the land. Because it doesn't really make any sense, because when you look at let's go back and we're going to look at the big picture again. Big picture. Okay, somebody somewhere, and they say now it's in China that it's quite possible human beings evolved first. Right? The first human being evolved. We were interspecies, and then we kind of evolved. At some point, somebody evolved as a human first. And the continents used to break up and come back together. It was Rodinia once, and then it broke up again, and then it came back, and it was Pangea, and it broke up again, and we have these different continents. So that first person that evolved into a human being, do they own, let's say all the continents were together, do they own every bit of land in the world and their descendants? And everyone else, every other group that evolved after them, owns absolutely nothing and has nowhere to live. The only people that have anywhere to live are the people who evolved to be human first. Wherever that is, they own absolutely everything. And it might not be Africa. It looks like this is happening all over the world, and it might not be Africa, and they might not actually be black. Because, see, if you look at the palm of your hands, so the palms of the hands of a black, somebody's black, right? Palms of the hands, bottom of the feet, it's white. They open up their mouths, right? Same as a white person. It's not black skin inside. See, the sun, when you live in the equator, the sun bears down very strong. And the only things that doesn't get heat is the bottom of your feet and the palms of your hands, and certainly the inside of your mouth, right? So the only parts of the body that actually get the necessity of the development of melanin in the skin is where it's hit by the sun. And most people ran around naked before they evolved clothes. So this whole idea about that white is inherently evil. How can white be inherently evil when black people have white palms and white at the bottom of their feet? I noticed this when I was a child. Nobody taught me this one. And you look at the sun and you see where the sun hits. It's just observation. And the necessity for melanin to grow, it's to prevent birth defects and for the body to form vitamin D. And if there's too much sun, the body can't form vitamin D. You have to have a barrier. And if it's too little sun, if you live in the north, it's too little sun, you have to have less melanin to allow more vitamin D in. It isn't that the white people can't handle the sun. It's that the ancestors, it's just where they lived. But also there's also the shape of the body. The Neanderthals lived in the north. So the Neanderthals had a barrel-shaped body which kept heat in, right? And modern humans, we're actually all modern humans. None of us are Neanderthal because we have a modern shaped body, which they say comes out of Africa. So essentially we're the same people. They put two people in a freezer. One had, their body was shaped more like a Neanderthal. That happened to pop out. Sometimes DNA, you get a little bit of something, and you can pop out. A black family could have a white child, and so on and so forth, because DNA and genetics just work that way. And they put them both in the freezer, a modern body, and which is modern man, which we all have. Pretty much nearly all of us have this body. So essentially we have the body of the people of Africa. So for any African to say that they're superior to whites, or for white social justice warriors to say that black people are severe, or black people are good and white people are evil, is actually ridiculous, because we're actually the same. It just has to do with a group of people that lived somewhere. There's the earth and there's the equator, and then you've got the sun's rays hitting at different points, and everybody kind of gets a different kind of suntan, right? Right. Okay. So they put them in a freezer, and when they took them out, the one with the barrel-shaped, more Neanderthal, they could handle the cold. Isn't that white people have to go running into a cave to survive? Oh, the sun is too hot, we only come out at night. But they can survive an ice age. And the Neanderthals could survive an ice age, which happens every so often. And there's parts of the world that are freezing that somebody with a Neanderthal body would survive, but somebody with a modern human's body would not survive. So if you say that one body is superior to the other, that's absolutely ridiculous. Because one body is not superior to the other. It depends on where you're living. So that's a bunch of baloney. I've heard this from both sides, from people of all colors and all racism. Racism is racism. Racism comes from whites and blacks and whites against whites because they like blacks or some black, whatever. Racism is racism. It's not reverse racism. Racism is racism. And one body is not superior to the other body at all whatsoever. And they say that the Neanderthals actually had a bigger cranium, so that it had a larger brain. So you can't say that the Neanderthals were stupid. We get this idea that the Neanderthals were stupid because actually one of them had rickets and they had osteoporosis. We dug up a body that was actually quite deformed and filled with maladies, and we thought that the Neanderthals must be hunched over, really ugly-looking people, and it's just the one that we dug up. But we discovered about in the 50s that this wasn't the case, except the word hasn't gone around yet, and we call people Neanderthals as if we're calling them stupid when actually they were quite smart. We don't know. Say who's smarter than who. Their brains were bigger than the brain we have today. All humans, white and black, have the same brain capacity. We're modern day humans. We do not have the brain capacity of the Neanderthals. So why you can't say that whites are superior to blacks, because we all have the same brain capacity. So let's see. We're going to go back to South. I hope you're enjoying this ride around the world. And this ride around the world is to help us to get into this ship with me and to help us understand the whole idea of racism and who's superior and who is evil and what makes someone evil and not evil. Well, you see, you do know that the only reason why that there was a slave trade is because the winners of the war, the tribes that won the war, took the entire tribe that lost the war in Africa and they sold them to the world, you see. Whites, people, they didn't enter the continent of Africa because there was a lot of wars going on and superior fighters, superior warriors, and things, all sorts of diseases and all sorts of wild animals. So no, the white people didn't go in there and throw a net over Kunta Kinte. And in Roots, the beginning, they throw a net. Kunta Kinte is running in the wild and he's all free and he's all happy. And then a bunch of really ugly white people come and throw a net over him. Well, that certainly wouldn't have taken out as many Africans. So you need a lot more than just that kind of, and they seemed to know exactly where he was. They didn't go to the tribe. There'd be very few black people that had left Africa and are now living in America today. And thank God, because there's a credible contribution with the African Americans, or they are Americans. They're long from being Africans, but the people that came, their ancestors came over, have contributed a great deal to our country. But anyway, so the losers were brought to the coast and they were sold slaves to the entire world. Slave trade actually started with the Muslims. It actually started with Muhammad. Muhammad started the slave trade, and 200 million, they say, Africans were killed by the Muslims. That's why you don't see any of them living in Arabia today. the men were castrated, and when the women they were sex slaves, gave birth to the baby, the joining of the slave, the Arabian and the African woman, they killed the baby immediately, and they also were kind of paranoid about the junk, they say, the package, the jewels that the African men had. So they had it cut off, and only 1 in 30 survived. So you see, so there's a bigger picture on racism. Saying who's the first racist? Well, actually, it was Muhammad, and the Muslims actually started, the Arabs that started the slave trade. Okay, so and then about 5% of the transatlantic slave trade came to America. 5% of the transatlantic. You know where 95% went? To South America. There's wonderful South Americans that are predominantly from Spain, Spanish conquistadors, and also, actually, most of them are European now. Very, very little is a mix of indigenous people. They're mostly European, but somehow it's just the people in America that have to go back, even though the Americas only took 5%. And South America, which celebrates Columbus like a hero, and we are so good and full of ourselves, the SJWs have taken away Columbus Day, which was a day to honor the contribution of Italian Americans, not necessarily Columbus, because there was about 35 Italian Americans that were unjustly lynched in Louisiana because they were considered Black under Jim Crow South. And so they gave them Columbus Day. So that's the reason why we have Columbus Day. But the South Americans celebrate it. And you go down there. I would say give a ticket, give a full pay ticket to every social justice warrior and send them down to South America for Columbus Day and see how they fare celebrating Columbus. But anyway, that's another story besides South Africa. Now, well, Winnie Mandela, the wife of Nelson Mandela, she hated the Zulus. Now, the Zulus aren't white, are they? She would throw a, you see, communism entered South Africa, and she was a communist. And what you do is throw a tire over them, each Zulu, and so they couldn't move, and then pour gasoline on them and set them on fire. Okay, we've mentioned. Okay, all right. White people are bad, but so it seems like black people do some bad things, don't they? I think that's why he actually divorced her, because that was pretty bad. But you've got a country that now, was it 1994, 1995? They gave some of the land. They reappropriated the land that's owned by some of the white farmers back to the Africans. And now it's squatters' land. It's not even farmland. It's kind of just like the land is just, it's not producing anything now. Okay. So that was kind of a failure. And so what you do is see what communism does is they make up, if you read 1984, but this is what communism does. This is what we do now. Patriot Act, which was an invasion of privacy. Affordable Care Act, which was not affordable when we lost our doctor. And the rates went up 5 or 6 times, and the deductible went up to $14,000. So you basically couldn't use it, but the money that you have to put into it went to pay for the borders that were opened. Obama opened up the borders and brought refugees in, and they got free health care, and they wouldn't go to jail if they didn't pay anything. So that was kind of Affordable Care Act. To who? See, that's communism. That's why communism kind of twists things around. So the people of South Africa are being told by their government that this is going to be great. We're going to take all this land, so we all our land back, when it was actually not really their land to begin with. They lived in tropical, northern, in the middle kind of Africa. They never lived there before. Their ancestors never lived there before. It was actually never taken from them. It's almost like the Native American thing, like the, if you really think about it, Native American, or the people who came to the Americas before the English came to the Americas, and actually it was the Spanish that came to the Americas first. Spanish did. Anyway, so it's going to be all hunky-dory. Everybody's going to be, well, so they're selling this. Everybody's going to be wealthy. They're going to have all this land. They're going to have this land, but who's going to farm it? It's going to be like Zimbabwe. Are they going to end up starving to death? Well, you see, the government uses their people as drones. That's what a communist government does. They use their people as drones, like they're using Antifa. George Soros is just paying Antifa and all these other groups that create riots. We won't name them all. You know who they are. So basically, to create all sorts of chaos and violence. And right now, South Africa is like the murder capital, rape capital of the world. It's like it's out of control in South Africa. And now, if you go back far enough, you really can't blame the people. So the people in Nigeria, they say that are on the tops of like the most intelligent people in the world. And you wonder why people who are Jewish, why are they so smart? Why do they have nearly 3,000 Nobel Prizes? And another group, let's say, has 7. We'll not name that group. It has 7. Well, there's a reason. It's the way they're raised. So it kind of proves that the intelligence is there. Isn't the intelligence isn't there in the genetics? It's how they're raised. The parents expect something from the children from the day they're born. They expect them to follow a certain path, and there's a certain discipline, and they succeed, right? And the Jews succeed, right? And other people succeed. And of course, the white people in the white countries would not have succeeded had there not been a government that laid down laws. Say the laws of the 10 Commandments are pretty good, because if you base it on there, and then you don't have a lawless society, and then you crack down that law, and if the government expects you to follow this, and if you don't, the law is cracked down, then you're going to follow it. If the government doesn't have, like in Mexico, that's the problem. Only 3% of the crime is prosecuted. 97% isn't. It isn't like a big deal if you don't follow the law. That's why it's kind of crazy. So if you don't have the government that sets that down, if you don't have the parents that set that down, then the children follow that path, and one generation begats another generation. So it kind of goes all the way back to somebody having a better idea, like I always use when they're about to stone the adulteress to death, and Jesus says, "Who amongst you has no sin? Cast the first stone." And they all realize the punishment for doing anything, stealing, lying, everything was death. And they all realized that was their punishment. Somebody comes up with a better idea. And that's what happens. And it could be just one person. But then people say, you know what? We don't want to live in a society where we have to be afraid when we walk down the streets, where we are constantly having to fight our neighbors or fight the people from the other town coming in trying to take our village. Wouldn't it be better if people just followed laws and there was order and there was less rape, less murder, hopefully no murder, no rape, no stealing. And then when there's no stealing, all that, the civilization grows and prospers. That's why. the law has to be laid down. Somebody comes up with that idea and people follow it. The parents lay down the law in the house and the children follow it and are expected to learn, to go to school, have a certain discipline. And when you have a certain discipline, your mind is focused in a certain direction. And you go forth in that direction and you drive it home until you get to your end, to that goal. And so you could say that it isn't that we have a continent with a bunch of people who are not, these people are smart. That has nothing to do with it. Like I said, it has to do with, you have to go all the way back. And the whole thing about constantly blaming, that's a big thing in 1984, that you have to blame another set of people. It's all their fault. It's all the white people. That's why we're poor. It's the white people. And then once they get it, and they've used their drones to take everything down, just like they want to use Antifa, the brown shirts, Hitler, the brown shirts, Mussolini, the black shirts, Stalin had the Red Army, Mao had the Red Guard, Pol Pot had the Khmer Rouge. You see, what happens is Africans have not been good. See, the people who were the leaders, like the kings, who set these wars out and go and say, take that land, take everything they own, I want all this. And then sell those people to the world, and the world will give me things that I can't make in Africa. Whatever they have, I want, and I will sell the losers to them. Okay, so this is what you got. This is what's happening here. So you think that these people are going to have, it's going to be a big party after they take all the land or they kill all the white people, whatever happens. White people will fight, but they'll not win. They'll not win. It's Africa. It's like Custer's last stand. They'll not win. Okay. The best thing for them to do is to go to Australia and New Zealand. These are hardworking people. These are the salt of the earth. They know how, they have a profession that they do very well, and they'll do well anywhere in the world. Sometimes we lose many things in this life. We lose the people that we love, and losing the people that we love or our animals, to me, is much harder than losing a piece of land. It's a piece of land. There's land all over the world. Go to another piece of land. It's not, you will not win there. That is my recommendation. Just go and leave it. It's a piece of dirt there, and you're going to be filled with people who are always fighting you and raping you and wanting to kill you. And you can't live like that. There's no peace. The only way that you mentally can grow and you can go forward and learn and be happy is if you're not fighting. Like I said about the tribes, somebody settled down when you stopped having to constantly fight tribes that were constantly coming after you, and the entire tribe has to war all the time. And then you have, when you didn't have to do that all the time, you said this segment of the population will be the best fighting force in the world, and this part of the civilization will work on medicine and work on growing crops and making the best clothing and education and literature and all that other stuff. You can't live like that you're always fighting 24 hours a day. You will all end up dying. It's a peace that will never be. Leave them to their end. If they can farm the land, that's good. They'll farm the land. If they can't and they're starving, you know what's going to happen. There'll be another Live Aid, and the whole world will come to their aid. And we will send them money because we're all feeling guilty that Africa is dying, So that will happen again because the people of the world, including the white people, basically it was the Western world that came to their aid. The white people came to their aid, and they did, and they helped Africa. And now, November 3rd of last year, William, the son of Charles and Diana, who were the progenitors of Live Aid, said that the world's population is too big, and we have to start with Africa by lowering the population. So see how things changed. the world helped Africa and fed Africa and brought them back up. And now there's a communist government that not only kills their own people, when you kill the Zulus, in a horrific way, just like Mao and just like Stalin and just like the rest of the Khmer Rouge, they turn against their own people. Once they have that in place, it's not going to be hunky-dory. The people who are out of control, like it is in all these communist regimes that they use to make war on other people, kill them off, frighten them into submission, and to becoming a drone, a cell in the state. As I said in my other video, please watch it. You have to get rid of the crazy ones, the ones that are warlike, because the government is threatened. The government is threatened. You can't have these people. You can't threaten the dictator, and you're going to have a dictator down there. You have to get rid of them, and they will get rid of them. So they're really in for a swell surprise that these people who are going, that they're sending out for violence, to create all this violence, and to get rid of all these white people, they will get rid of them because the government can't be taken down. The dictator can't be taken down. They will get rid of them next. That's what's going to happen. And if they can't grow these crops, they will starve. But the world will end up coming to their aid because that's the right and noble thing to do. I heard a woman say that the only thing when I walk down the street that they see is the color of my skin. They don't see that I have a soul. We've gotten away from that. It's all about the color of the skin. Somehow 10 years ago, something changed, and we thought somewhat people voted because, see, I'm not a racist, I voted for this person. And some people voted because I'm so sick of whatever racism is left, this will be the end of it, and this man will bring us together. But what happened was the color of the skin is the thing that mattered, not your soul, not who you are. If a Martian landed, we think just because, look, the Italians did this and that I can take credit for it. Well, the Northern Italians will look at me and say, no, you can't take credit. You're not. Or you're not even their family. I can't take credit for the accomplishments of my family who's accomplished a great deal. I can't take accomplishment for any of those things because I didn't do them. So you're not all one just because of the color of your skin or your religion. You're not all one even if you're family. I don't get along very well with my sister. She can't stand me. I'm too artsy-fartsy. You're not all one. What sometimes makes us one? We go out there and then we find a friend that has something in common with us, something that speaks to our soul. There's a linkage. It's a soul. Like if Martian or somebody from another planet landed and they said, look at that. I use the same shampoo. Oh, this shampoo is great. Oh my God, the makeup collection that you have and the jewelry. And then we have some kind of bondage. You go, I don't have this on my planet, but I absolutely love this. And somehow we have a bonding. And it's not necessarily amongst material things, but we begin to talk and we understand what we're saying. And we understand, we look into each other's eyes, that there's symbiosis, the soul. There's something connected with the soul, the quantum entanglement, in some strange sense. But you see, it is nothing. The color of the skin means nothing. Even if it's your family, it means nothing. I have a family that hates me. It's like they didn't know where I came from. And a UFO did land on the hospital before I was born. It's true. So it's quite possible that I would get along with aliens much better than my family. But it's true. So we have a friend that's closer to us and closer to our soul, or our soulmates that we find in this world, and we're lucky, perchance, to marry them. Or sometimes it's an animal that's our soulmate. There's something and what do you have in connection with your cat or your dog? It's a soul. There's an energy there. So it means nothing. That's why in communism, you're a non-person. It doesn't mean anything that they have the same color skin. It means nothing. That's what Stalin, he created non-personhood. And unfortunately, these people who've adopted communism in South Africa are going to find out real fast. You see, if your government, the person that you are electing, you find out that they do all these horrible things and they do all these underhanded things against another group of people. Let's say, like we in this country, ICE, because we have a lot of liberals in the judicial system, they found that even if this person is accused of rape or murder or domestic violence against another illegal alien or Mexican or whatever it is, if ICE comes into the building, they let them go, they let them free because they don't want them deported, which is wrong, which is completely wrong. And so if you have a government system that says, if you're an American citizen, you're going to go to jail. I don't care if you're Hispanic. I don't care if you're Black. I don't care what it is. We only let the illegals go because we don't want them deported, because we need their vote. We're going to give them free housing and free food and free everything. And we want their vote and enough extra money that they can send back home. Because we want their vote, because we want a one-party rule. We want a dictator. We want socialism. You see, that's why they're doing it. But aside from that, if you have a government that's doing all these underhanded things, and you see that he's starting to do it against you, you're a citizen, even though you're voting for these people. If you commit a crime, you will go to jail, even if you're a Democrat. Do you understand? So if you are supporting people that are doing underhanded things, they're doing wrong things and are lying to you and rewrote history about South Africa, and apartheid was very bad. Not saying that apartheid is good. Apartheid was very bad. But these people are the ancestors, and their ancestors came there. They have nothing to do with that. They've been living on this land for so long. They're not the ones who did anything to the Black people, and there was nobody living there when their ancestors came. It's kind of like it's like punishing you for the sins of your father, and that isn't right. Should a show family go to jail? This whole thing about the children that were put into the cages or separated from their parents. As it turned out, 83% of the parents were not parents. They were sex traffickers, and we cared about that. But no, the children should not pay for the sins of the fathers. And these people are the children, the fathers, the great, we're talking many generations. Then that isn't their sin. If you call it a sin, what happened, it isn't. They didn't do it. They're just farming, and they're growing crops that are feeding the people of Africa. They're actually helping by feeding the Africans. So if they do these things that are unjust, and you put these people in power, what kind of laws are you going to live under? What kind of rule is it? Are you going to be treated fairly? If someone cheats their way to the top and breaks all sorts of laws and treats people poorly, very badly, do you think because they say, we're going to get rid of these people, and the government, it's going to be the government. Communism, you own nothing. The people of Africa are not going to get that land. Communism, the government owns everything, and the government owns you. And when you're not necessary anymore, they kill you. So no, the people of Africa saying, you're not going to get anything. The government is going to get it. And what kind of rules are going to be in place? And what are you going to have to live under when your government does such violence and underhanded things, or allows violence to occur to get their way, but they have to kill you off because they don't want you to turn on them? Do you want, that's why this past election, presidential election, I was scared out of my mind what was going to happen. Because I knew the truth. I knew what was behind these candidates and who was lying and who was telling the truth and what they were willing to do and what they had done. But what they were willing, you knew what they were willing to do. So, people of South Africa, you need to wake up. White people, leave. You have to leave. It's just a piece of land. It's just a piece of land. Take your family, take your soul with you. There are other people who will accept you and love you and appreciate your gift and your hard work. Go there. People of South Africa, get rid of your communist government because they're going to turn on you and you're going to suffer. You need to know how to farm. You need to know how to produce crops on that land to feed each other, but get rid of that communist government because you don't know about the history of communism, and communism will always turn on you. Thank you for listening. One little kiss from Felina, from my heart to everyone of every race, every religion, every creed. All of you should be treated peacefully and lovingly, and walk away from those who are violent, and go to those people, related or not related, same color as you or not the same color as you, that will accept you and appreciate you, whoever they may be. You've got a place to go, white people, South Africa, just go. Just go.